Now, this is important, Brent. If we close this deal, it means success for the entire company. We can't give them much, though. We're stretching it as it is.
Right.
Now, who are we meeting to discuss the terms of the contract?
Let me see. His name is Assad Hassan. He's their vice president of sales.
Who? Assad who?
Assad Hassan. Why? What's the matter?
No, we're in trouble.
Why? What do you mean?
Brent, don't you know anything? That's an Arab name.
Right. I think Assad's from Lebanon.
Great. Now we'll never get a good deal.
Why not?
Don't you know that Arabs are impossible to deal with? They're so different. For one thing, it takes them forever to get to the point. They just talk and talk and talk and talk. It takes them an hour to say something that would take us 5 minutes to say. I tell you, it's going to drive me crazy.
I see.
You know, Arabs always hire their own family members. That's not good. It's bad business to have your family involved.
Isn't your brother-in-law vice president of shipping and receiving?
That's different. Another thing, they never admit when they're wrong. Arabs are just plain stubborn. Brent will be lucky to make a dime off this deal.
Did you hear what he said?
Yeah, I did. It's no wonder Arabs are so disliked.
What makes you think they're like that?
Well, you heard what he said.
And you believe him?
Well, why shouldn't we?
All right. Could you give me an example of an Arab you know who is the way he described?
Well, that's kind of ridiculous.
Why?
Because we don't know any Arabs.
Well, exactly. So from personal experience, you don't really know if what that man said is true.
He's got you there.
See, that businessman is just repeating the same things he's heard from others who don't know anything either, and so the stereotypes continue. We all tend to believe generalizations, and generalizations are dangerous. Not all Arab nations are the same. In fact, they are very different from each other in their culture, their dialect, their economy, and even in their climate.
I always compare this, when I talk to Westerns, to two things. The many races that exist in Europe and the many races that existed in the United States.
There are three distinct geographical areas of the Middle East. There's North Africa, which includes Mauritania, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Sudan. And then there's the Fertile Crescent, which is made up of Israel and Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, and the Arabian Peninsula of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, the 7 United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait.
Not only are people different in different countries, but there are differences within nations as well. You have sophisticated urban dwellers in Cairo, Damascus, Beirut, and other major cities. These people are far removed from the peasant farmers in the villages.
The only one thing that's consistent is language. And yet even that is divided into different dialects. You get a variety of cultures and practices and food and dress codes and everything else.
The Arab world is a wonderfully rich mosaic of sights and sounds, of peoples and traditions. Many Arabs were originally nomadic and tribal in nature. That led to a hospitable way of life which is very distinct.
If you go to any Arab house, they'll tell you ahlan wa sahlan. And these two words are very important to understand, so you can get a little bit of feed on the background. Ahl means family. Sahl means a valley. So you've arrived in a place where you have a family and a valley. And a valley is very, very important because the Arabs, as nomads, found it very nice to find a valley where they can have water and food. It was a vital thing for them. So when you arrive to a place, you've arrived among your family and in a valley where they can offer you a lot.
I think what's different is the relationships. I mean, family relationships, how we're tied together, how we like to know each other, and how we spend time, make an effort to keep this relationship going no matter how much it would cost. I mean, not cost money-wise, but effort-wise, and sometimes would go out of our way for others just to look nice and friendly and not to lose certain friend, to keep relationships going on.
Half of us were nomads and half of us were farmers. If they are farmers, they had to wait for floods, and the flood had to bring the plant, and the plant will take its time to grow, so there was no point in running. If you run faster, you won't let the plant grow faster. But if people come, you have to offer them part of what you have. So this part of hospitality comes from the religion, from the ecology of the land, from the culture that you want to show your immediate family in a valley, in a good place, with good products, and generosity is part of it.
Middle Easterners are well known for their warmth and their desire to please and a passion to relate to others.
Yes, I find the Arabs a real people, and more than idea people. And I find for myself, for example, that they bring me out of myself. And my wife tells me that when somebody phones up from the Middle East, an Arabic-speaking person, and I talk to them in Arabic, she says I become a different person when I talk to them in Arabic.
Like when you visit a family in the Arab world, it would not be only just a cup of coffee. It could start by, you know, some candy and some juice and some cook and some biscuits and some coffee and tea. And if you're lucky enough to go for lunch and dinner, there will be tens of plates, and you'll be expected to try all of them to show appreciation to the family.
I also think of another story of a friend of mine who is now working in Egypt. He left Egypt as a teenager, and he was told by an Egyptian as he was trying to relearn his culture, he said, you know, in this part of the world, you honor people more by visiting them in their homes than by inviting them to your home. Now, that was a revelation to him, and certainly to all of us who were brought up in the West.
Even in a business setting, relationships are very important.
Their idea of business is you come over, you know, sometime in the morning, and you share a meal with them, you share ideas, you share some of your past, they can get to know you as a person, they appreciate your values, they want to learn a little bit about your family, and as they get to know you personally, you know, they feel more relaxed to do business with you. They feel they can trust you more. And then the business follows after that. And normally, it's once they give you their word, they stand by the word.
An Arab's word is very important to him because it is a matter of honor.
Oh, it's very, very important. People die to preserve their honor. When I used to do mission work in Israel, there are many Druzes and Muslims there. They told me these three things. They said, we told the Jewish army not to touch our land, not to touch our women, or our honor, family honor. So these are the three prerequisites to keep things out of holy wars, you might say. You know.
Preserving honor is so important it can have a negative effect on relationships.
And the Arabs are very proud people. So if you insult them publicly, they'll never forgive you nor forget.
Of course, Arabs are able to forgive, but it may be very difficult to do so when honor is at stake. And that may be part of the cause of a real need of Arab young people. They said in a recent poll that their greatest need was for forgiveness for things in their past.
Could you tell us more about the culture of the Middle East?
Okay. In the Middle East, families have a very special significance.
That is something very important. It's more important than anyone would think of.
And that's part of Islam, is just inviting people to be together, especially family ties to be maintained, and but we definitely try to maintain those family ties as closely as we can.
In feasts and festivals, family gatherings are very important. The family has to get together, and the first day they have to be together, and they have to be with the grandparents and so on.
I have 3 brothers and a sister, and we have always been very much tied together. And we make a point of visiting or getting together on at least bi-weekly basis, or not bi-weekly, every 2 weeks or every month.
How the children need to respect their parents, how the parents need to take care of the children, how overprotective the parents in the Arab world are on their children. The fact that children do not leave their house at the age of 18, as most of the Westerns do, or once they get to college. No, they stay in the family house till they get married, and this applies to both girls and boys.
The Arabs have managed to preserve something which we in our own society have lost. That is the importance of the bond of loyalty in the family, the seriousness in which commitments to family are taken. And along with this, you have the seriousness with which Muslims approach their whole system of morality. They see it as something that comes from God.
I would say it is much easier for me to live as a Christian and to raise my family as Christians in Egypt than in Canada, where I was for 18 years. And as people say, isn't it rough to live in Egypt? I said, no, you have it rough. I don't know any of my close friends who've been divorced in the last 13 years in Egypt. My daughter at school doesn't know any of her friends of any kind or sort who've had premarital sex. That's a blessing.
I bet you we could learn a lot about stable and loyal families from the Arab world.
Oh, you're right there. In the Middle East, the emphasis is on the community, and individual rights are secondary to the needs of the community.
Well, that affects the whole way a person thinks.
We're not as self-centered in a way. We're not the ones who really matter. Sometimes I would do something that's not suitable for me, or maybe not suitable for my setup, just to please or help a dear person or a friend, and sometimes a person who's not really that important to me, but I think I should make the effort.
There is one other factor which affects the culture of the entire Arab world. That is their belief in God and in the religion of Islam.
In their everyday practices, they refer to God and they give God the thanks and the blessings and for everything they do, and they acknowledge His presence with them every step of the way.
Islam has, in addition to the practices, to the prayers and the fasting and so on, the laws of life. What should you say? What should you do? When someone dies, what do you do? The heritage, how should it be divided? The parents, what do you do to your parents, even if they're tough on you? I mean, all those things are clearly stated in Islam. So Islam does control a big part in the life of Muslims who understand Islam properly.
You know, I'm beginning to see why there's such a big difference in the way we in the West think and the way that the Arabs think. Not that one is inferior to the other, it's just that we've had such drastically different influences on our lives and on our history.
I know. You know, for example, I can't imagine what it would be like to have Islam affecting every aspect of our environment.
We need to learn more about Islam and what it teaches.
And you will. But that, my friends, is another program.
We now are here tonight. My name is Ben Duffy, working with Operation Mobilization and working to share with you more about the Middle East. Tonight we're going to cover Session 2, which is God and Family. We're going to discuss many things that are true in the Middle East, and after we finish, then it'll be a time of questions. But maybe some of you would like to know a little bit about my background. I went to the Middle East in 1975 after finishing university and working for a year, and I had no idea that there were any Arabs living in the Middle East. I had studied about the Jews, I had studied about the fact that the Jewish nation existed, and so I went to the land of Israel, but had no clue that the people who were actually working all over the kibbutz, or the Jewish community that I was living in, were actually Arabs. And it was only after a period of time my eyes were opened and I was able to understand that there were two peoples, at least, living in the nation, Arabs and Jews. And then, of course, as time went on, my view of the Middle East expanded. And from 1975, pretty much until just about 3 years ago, I lived half my life in the Middle East. And that's the background that I come from, which allows me to share with you more about the Middle East. Now we're going to examine tonight, in Session 2, the family life in the Middle East and how people think, and we'll also be trying to cover the contrast between how those in the East and those in the West, in their particular culture views, act and think. Some of the things that we're going to discuss tonight in terms of the topics are Arab customs and culture, honor and family, the importance of hospitality in the Middle East, the high values placed on long-term relationships, and also the contrasting views, as I've mentioned, between East and West. Customs, culture, and character. The Arab world is neither one culture or common in all cultures that are practiced. In other words, as we look across the Arab world, we see those in North Africa are distinctly different in terms of how they speak to each other than those who live in the Egyptian region. And also, if we move over to the Gulf region, there are 3 distinct languages. But also, there's also in every country, in every section of every country, slightly different, varying cultures, cultural values, foods, dress. And so it's a mosaic, as was mentioned in the video, a mosaic of the Arab world is many mosaics all put together into one large mosaic of similarities and diversities. The various ethnic groups differ greatly. You have groups such as the Berbers in North Africa, which differ culturally, linguistically, in terms of mindset, very different than the Arabs who live maybe next door to them or live in another region of the city which they live in or of the country. Yet there is a common thread between the culture and the heritage of the people, because they see themselves as the Arabs of the Middle East who come from the roots of Islam and Muhammad, and we'll be covering that more in the future. Now, some of the illustrations I'd like to give have to do with for example, the Arab coming to the West. He has values in the East where he needs to be asked several times if he's going to want something. And then once that happens, out of a cultural humility, he will refuse often until it's pushed on him or forced on him, and then of course he'll receive it, and it's almost like a cultural game. But an Arab coming to the West may not, I mean, he will not touch your food if he's brand new here. He's going to be trying to learn the ropes. He won't actually touch the food you put in front of him unless you offer it like 3 times. He'll always say to you politely, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. But that actually is the way that you're supposed to act in the Middle East in terms of just politeness. And those who come here quickly learn that if they refuse once, they won't get a second chance. I've had friends tell me, you know, I was awful hungry and I was awful thirsty until I realized I needed to just say yes the first time. The Westerner honoring a family to eat with him, and what may happen at a meal. What we saw in the video and what we need to understand is when you invite a family to you, they may come, or like even an Eastern family that comes to you, you may actually just talk with them at the table, never thinking how important it is that you're presenting to them from the time they walk in something to drink, and then a snack, and then fruit, and then maybe cookies, and then maybe some nuts, and then you are making a cup of coffee or tea in the kitchen while you're talking to them, telling them, please don't leave until the tea is done or the coffee's done. It's on the fire. And their idea of hospitality is very different than our idea. I've gone into many homes in the West, and I've been sort of made to feel a little bit uncomfortable because nothing was offered to me. Not even a cup of water. It wasn't part of the equation in the West where you automatically get all these things presented to you. The idea of you having someone over to your home, you think is a great thing. You know, I'm showing hospitality. But as we saw in the video, you going to their home is even a greater honor. you are actually blessing them or helping them by showing up at their door and showing an interest in their lives by going to visit them. The idea of hospitality is so very, very important in the East. We need to realize how important it is, so that when we do go visiting Arabs, their greatest joy is to be able to show hospitality. Now, there's a number of customs among the Arabs. There's a custom of generosity. Arabs are so very generous. Now, part of that is because of their theology. Now, many Muslim Arabs will be very generous because they are realizing that their salvation is in part tied to their generosity. The more generous they are, the more they earn points for heaven. And on the other hand, it's part of the culture, giving, 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 even when they don't have. Relating in social settings between men and women. The whole aspect of guys sitting around with girls, and girls sitting around with guys that's unguarded, uncontrolled, is taboo there. Everything has to be done properly, and there's much more of a Victorian spirit. Men meet with men, women meet with women, and it's, if there is any interaction, it's done very with much reserve. It's not just a smorgasbord of whatever. Relationships are a priority. This is tantamount to the most important thing I would say, that relationships are everything. I had a friend just call me from the Middle East 2 days ago, just reminding me of how much he cares about me. And it's been 3 years, and I may have called him once, and he's called me several times. He wants to continue to preserve that relationship no matter what the cost is to him personally. The idea of the TV. Now, you may walk into a home and you may say, how are you? I'm fine, great, great. And then they may just go over and they may turn on the TV, and you think, what in the world? You're trying to have a conversation with them and they've turned on the TV. Well, they've turned on the TV because that may be what they understand to be the greatest act of hospitality that they can show you. Because they want to give you their very best, and one of the best things they can do is turn on the TV, because that's full of all sorts of programs that might entertain you. They want to make you feel comfortable. Then you might feel like, wow, I'm trying to talk to this person about the Lord, and they're turning on the TV. But in fact, that's all part of their culture. Welcoming strangers. One of the things is that, welcoming strangers is very, very important for the Middle Easterner. It's at a Bedouin encampment. I've gone where there's been a sheep sitting on a tripod, and I've shown up, a total stranger. They've invited me in. They've fed me with everybody else. They've cooked the meat and brought out the vegetables and all the rice, and we had this beautiful 3-course meal, and they didn't even know what my name was. And that's the point, that at a Bedouin encampment, a rural setting, even an urban setting, welcoming strangers is very, very important. I've gone into homes of people all over the city, young modern couples or with religious couples. It'll differ, because with modern, people who are trying to be very much up to date, you'll be talking to both the men and the women. It'll be a lot of interaction. Where if you're with a religious couple, the man will be talking to you, and if you're with your wife, then she will be sent off into another room to talk to the wife, and there'll be a separation of the two. In the family in the Middle East, it's different in terms of the father's role and the mother's role. The father is often out. He buys all the food. He does all the shopping. He's out to takes care of all the practical things in terms of the household. And the mother's role is to raise the children and to be home and to cook the food, and it's much more traditional. Now, this is changing, like many places in the world where we lived on a street in the Middle East. Many of the women were working women. They were out in the workplace. They were spending their time 6-8 hours a day working at a job, and they would come home, and their husbands then their roles would change, and then they would be helping in the house with the chores, where in a traditional setting, the man would never touch anything. He would simply sit, and the wife and the sisters would do everything in the household. Very different in terms of their situation than our situation. Always being ready for guests is very, very important to understand. The key issue here is that guests could show up at any time without any announcement. So you could have a family of 6 people show up at your front door with no idea that they were coming, and your obligation would be to receive them happily and joyfully, whether or not you were tired or ready for them, and then have the whole series of things from a glass of juice or water to nuts and cookies and fruit, and then ending up with a cup of coffee, all said with the most welcoming language that you can muster, that if you were to make them ever feel that they weren't welcome, then it would be actually an insult. Now, preserving relationships in the areas of honor, face, and money, extremely important to remember that people's honor, their saving face, and issues of money are very, very important. Saving face and honor are very, very similar. They're very similar terms. But if you insult somebody in front of all of their family, then they lose face. If they promise you something and they're embarrassed publicly, they lose face. And that's a very important thing in the East that you cannot underestimate. We are almost detached as a society. You don't even know often who your next door neighbor is. There's 2 people down the street. And there, everybody knows everything about everybody. It's like a very, very small town in America in the olden days. And so anything that anybody does is public knowledge. And so how you spend your money, what you do with your money, is often tied into protecting the honor of your family and the honor of your name, and also being sure that, this is case in point. We had a relative, or a neighbor who had a business which was to sell clothes out of their home. And the point was that all the relatives would come and promise to pay them. And they would take things. They would take, like, whether a shirt, a pair of pants, and everything, and they would never pay them. And the point was that to save your honor and to save face, you wouldn't go after them like a bill collector. You would have to wait until they paid you, because it would be embarrassing to them and it would be embarrassing to you. You could maybe ask them once, but then you couldn't pursue them. And that's the whole aspect of how relationships having to be preserved within a family network can be very difficult and even full of tension when there is actually people taking advantage of each other. Now, the separate play between boys and girls. This is something which we'll see again in our lessons. But the point is that there is among Muslims there's a distinct difference. Girls play with girls, guys play with guys. When you get into high school, maybe someone has a girlfriend or boyfriend, but it's very secret. It's not public. It's not done publicly. They don't go off together, or if they do and they get caught, it can be a lot of repercussions. The one thing about it is that when you have Muslims versus Christians co-ed play, that is that in a Christian school you'll have girls and guys playing volleyball together. They won't be doing what we do in the West in terms of hanging out, kissing on the wherever. It's not that. That's not the issue. Just the fact that they're playing volleyball together is looked on with disdain by the Muslim community as being almost tantamount to something that's immoral. And so you have a difference in terms of the 2 cultures, where the Christians are much more westernized, and they feel that it's okay for girls to play volleyball with guys, and there's much more social interaction. In the Muslim situation, there's not. And one of the things is that in the Muslim belief is that there are always 3 people in a room. That is, if there's a girl and a fellow in the room, there's the guy, the fellow, and Satan, that he's always tempting, which is probably not such a bad idea for us to remember that indeed that is true, that there's a temptation there. And then the separate social networks between men and women is often something which we don't know about. where women have a whole network of other women that they relate to and they talk about and they discuss things with, and men have their own social networks. Now, the way of dressing, there's Western dress, and that is often very common throughout the entire Middle East. And then you'll have these older gentlemen who will be dressed in beautiful Arab garments that have a little band on the lapel, and it says "Made in London" in English, or "Made in China." And so it's often, the irony of it all is that the very thing that they're wearing, which is supposed to be so Arabic, is actually made in another region of the world. Now, you have headdresses, and what do they mean? There's usually at least the white headdresses that are seen in pictures, those are of the peasants, the peasant farmers. Now, the fact that it's white and peasant farmers, that's looked on as basically a negative thing. It's like they're just dumb, basically dumb, just dumb farmers. And the white is really not looked on with lots of esteem. Then you'll have the red and the white keffiyeh that's quite world famous. You'll even see it out on the table there. And that happens to do with the Jordanian monarchy in Jordan. The red and white is their code of whatever. It's a keffiyeh, that's the Arabic term, and that represents the Transjordan or the Jordanian regime. And black and white, of course, is the Palestinian. It's worn throughout the world by college students in Europe, in America. And the turbans, etc., have various meanings, but partly that's, you'll go down in through Sudan or you'll go through Egypt, and the turbans have the practical realm of being something that you unwind when you're going through a sandstorm, and you can use it to cover your mouth, and it can protect you both from sun and from the wear of sand. And there are various turbans of various colors throughout the Middle East, and it's a mosaic of different colors. Shorts on men. This is something which we might not think about, but anybody who's over 15 is expected that if they're not having a sport or they're not going swimming, they don't wear shorts in town. It's just thought of not on. Fellows, they wear jeans or long pants. Older men usually don't wear jeans, they wear slacks. There's a whole series of things it's just not on. And there are exceptions made in bigger towns, and there are even people who wear shorts because living, for example, in Israel, where the dress code among Jews is very different. It's very, what do you call it? Anything goes. Shorts, tank tops, everything else on men, it's cool. And so the Arabs often will vary on this cultural rule that men over 15 don't wear shorts, but in general is thought of as not cool. Modesty among the Bedouins. My wife went to with me to a Bedouin tent, and the women took her into the women's section. And there, she was dressed from like, she had a scarf on and she had a dress on and everything else, but her feet were seen. And so the Bedouins found that was a bit offensive, so they got towels and they covered her feet, as that was like something that you didn't want to be seen, that shouldn't be seen. But then, you'll have women breastfeeding, but making sure that their feet are covered. So right there publicly breastfeeding, So anyway, it's the bottom of your shoe. That is something which is very important to remember, that when you're in an Eastern setting, it's very similar anywhere in the East, that you don't want to lift the bottom of your shoe to point towards the person that you're facing. I have an American friend who was in his home in Bethlehem. He was welcoming this Arab couple that had come to see them, was really, really happy that they were there, and so unknowingly, he sort of fell back into what the Americans call, "I'm so happy that you're here, I can put my feet up on the table" situation. I'm so relaxed about your presence. And so you can already know that that couple made a simple excuse why they had to leave suddenly, because his feet were actually crossed and pointing towards this couple. and they didn't come back into his home for a year, and he didn't even have a clue what had happened until they explained, or somebody explained it to him. So we always have to remember that the bottom soles of the shoes are looked on as the dirtiest part of the body. And even in Indonesia, where a girl was playing around with some fellow students, and she took off her sandal and she threw it at one of the boys in fun. She was an American. She soon found herself on trial for offending and doing something that was even vulgar. So we always have to remember these small things that matter. Now, there are various customs. Now, one of the things is that a foreigner's closeness to a family in a home is that there's two things that are happening here. One, the foreigner is outside the network, so he may hear stories or hear things from that family that no one else would ever hear because he's a foreigner and outside of the network. But another thing is that a foreigner might be talked to by the girls of the family. You know, there will be older brothers there, but the girls will talk to him, he being like a fellow who's visiting other fellows in the house, will talk to him and be really, really friendly, and even go so far as even to slap him on the arm. But then, outside of the home, they might not even, walking down the street, they might walk right up to him and just walk right past him and never say a thing, because they know that everybody in the neighborhood is watching them, and if they were to show friendliness, then it would be tantamount to, immoral. How to relate to the same people on the streets. To the men, the idea is that men relate to men. You don't give that bear hug that you normally would give to somebody in this country, the big bear hug. And to women, the idea is that everybody's watching you, so just be very sort of like almost, you don't look at men in the eye, you just look at the ground, you look in other directions, you just avoid direct contact. If you shake somebody's hand, like a woman is shaking a man's hand, you give them the dead fish handshake, absolutely dead fish, which is actually a polite way of relating to him rather than the Western strong, assertive handshake, because by giving the assertive handshake, you're basically communicating something that you're not trying to communicate. Looking them in the eye, you're not trying to tell them that you're interested in spending time with them intimately. You're trying to just be very modest, and modesty is crucial because they can misinterpret any intention that you have as a Western person, Western woman, as being a come-on. Okay? So by the fish handshake and averting your eyes and not looking them in the eye, you're basically acting very much more like a Middle Easterner, and you're not saying, I'm coming on to you. I know it sounds strange, but they've watched enough videos and they've seen Dallas and American-style wrestling to know what our Christianity is all about. Understanding the contrasting worldviews of Westerners and Easterners. Now, thinking like an individual is something which we take great pride in. We are trained to think like individuals. We are asked and challenged to think like individuals. But then we come to the East and they think like a group. Now, not only do they think like a group across the Middle East, but they think like a group as a family, they think like a group like as an extended family, they think like a group like a tribe, they think like a group as a city, as a culture, as a nation, and as a whole. We have to remember that the group think. Now, it's harder for them to come to personal faith. Hospitality as a gesture is what we do in the West. If I give you a cup of water, I give you a cup of water. If I don't give you a cup of water, hey, I've done enough. Hospitality is a duty in the East. Everything goes. If I don't show you hospitality that's successful or significant, then I really am not really wanting you there. The world of men and women merging is something which we have happening all the time. Men and women are merging. They're always in each other's. And our TV shows and everything else emphasize that. The world of men and women separated in the East. Men do not meet with women because there's tremendous fear of adultery, and in fact, there's a tremendous amount of everybody watching everybody and spying on everybody, and you know that you're being watched, and so you don't, there's not a mixing over, that women meet with women, men meet with men. Decision making is my responsibility versus decision making is our responsibility. When I want to buy a couch or I want to get a piece of carpeting, I don't ask my extended family. I just make that decision, you know, myself and my wife together, we make the decision. In the East, it's involving uncles and aunts and cousins, and everyone is asked, you know, what is your opinion about which couch I'm going to get, and it's often an extended family decision. Questioning of authority encouraged, that's what we encourage in the East, in the West. We encourage people to challenge authority by our questioning and by, you know, even the Marlboro man is actually bucking authority. He's his own man, he's his own individual, and he'll do what he wants. Versus the questioning of authority discouraged. Conformity is encouraged. Conformity in terms of how you think and how you learn and everything else is looked on as, you know, learning this particular way. Disease in the family telling the patient. Disease and the family not telling the patient is, you know, in the East, often the family will say, don't tell them that they have, they've got cancer. And so the patient may not know anything. He may think he knows, or he may have a feeling that this is the case, but the family will do everything they can to avoid telling him the truth because they're afraid of causing him bother. In the West, of course, we would think that it was almost tantamount to treason that we would be not told. Marriage and family in flux, marriage, family stable. In the West, we're all struggling with keeping our families together, marriages together. In the East, marriage and families are much more stable. You're surrounded with families that aren't going anywhere. They're not going to get divorced. They just hang in there. They stick it out. And there are in our street of 20 homes, there are two couples. One couple got divorced a number of years ago, and there's another couple who are separated, but it's an exception to the rule. Okay, you just stick it out. Public displays of affection appropriate in the West, but in the East, public displays of affection are inappropriate. I was on a street where there was an American woman who was a volunteer, a Baptist volunteer leader who was greeting her, like her short-term workers, and they came up to her on the street in Nazareth, and she gave them each a bear hug. Now, she didn't do anything immoral or wrong, but it was such a shock because it was so different than anything around you, because men and women were not even holding hands. Okay? Hospitality, secular life and faith separated, secular life and faith integrated. These are values that are very important in the East, that the two are all connected. Everything is connected in your life. Where we separate church and state, we separate our secular life and our faith. There's a separation there, which actually is not supposed to be the case in our Christian's life. Everything's supposed to be integrated, but as a culture, we separate the two. Visitation and family visits, it's stated the same on both, but what I want to try to explain, wording-wise, hospitality and family visits in the West is where I go to visit my relative in the hospital, and maybe I make one visit every several days, and the person may not see anybody else. In the East, it's a family obligation to go see the person. So that person who's in the hospital and might be even sick, they are faced with a massive amount of visitors. In fact, sometimes when a woman has a baby, she goes home to try to get some rest because they've had so many visitors from all of her relatives that she's exhausted. The genie, as seen in the movie Aladdin versus the jinn in Folk Islam, we need to remember that we are decreasing the spiritual understanding. The genie in the East is a fearful spirit that the people take seriously. In the West, we make fun of it, thinking that it's a purple, almost a purple servant. But in fact, the genie is the word for jinn in Arabic, and it is indeed looked on with serious consequences in the East. So there's a contrast between our understanding of satanic forces in the West. We don't take it seriously, where the Arab does. Now, the ways of thinking in the Arab world. Now, we've talked about these before, but these are very important in understanding that they are part and parcel of the tapestry of what you are facing when you go to talk to an Arab. Okay? You're not just talking about all the things that we just talked about. On top of that, there's this another grid that they think everything through. They're both historical, they're political, it's all united. It's all one big sticky ball. They have had Arab socialism under Abdul Nasser. Anybody in the last 20 years knows all about Abdul Nasser. Communism has swept the Middle East, you know, in terms of the Russians being an influence, and now they're back in Israel, and they're trying to be an influence in the Middle East. They're trying to extend their influence. Fundamentalism of Baathism in Syria and Iraq is a secular socialism that have a particular slant on it, and that actually influenced the lives of millions and millions of people. Fundamentalism is a trend that's happening in the Middle East today, both Islamic and Jewish fundamentalism, the Islamic Brotherhood. Sayyid Qutb is actually the patriarch, the literary patriarch of Muslim fundamentalism. He was killed in the 20s I'm sorry, he wasn't killed in the 20s. He was killed by Nasser before Nasser was died. But the point was his writings have continued on to influence Muslim fundamentalism throughout the entire Middle East, and he is quoted extensively. The Jewish fundamentalism, which is growing in strength, the Bloc of the Faithful in Israel are the main proponents of settlement in the West Bank, and they've moved over 300,000 people into the West Bank to live in very large villages, extended cities, with beautiful lawns and shopping centers and everything else. So that's one of the things why it's so difficult for the government to move them out, because they vote as a bloc. They vote, 300,000 people vote as one against the government, and so it's really hard for them to move them. Again, Americanism, which of course is MTV, Dynasty, American style wrestling, they equate that to our American Christianity. Now, one other aspect of thinking in the Middle East is the idea of folk beliefs. Now, folk Islam is a very real thing. It's how people think, it's how people feel, it's how people perceive their reality. And coffee ground reading is crucial. We have tarot card reading here in this country. I pray against this constantly whenever I see one of these houses. But people will read your coffee cup. They will. The grounds, after you've drunk your coffee, your thick cup of Turkish coffee, they will look at those grounds and they will tell you this is your future. Another thing is the idea of curses, that people can put curses on each other, and that's a very prevalent part of folk Islam. The idea of jinn and the evil eye. The evil eye is the eye that looks at little babies, so that will often make little babies look very, very ugly, with charcoal around their eyes, put an amulet with a blue stone on it to try to scare the evil eye away. Then the idea of sulha, which is different than a legal system there. The Arabs have a system of trying to solve conflicts. So we had a conflict in our neighborhood of 20 homes. There were 2 homes that were constantly fighting all the time, whether it was with reinforced concrete bars or knives or eggs or paint. And so the street called a sulha, which meant that the people in both houses had to come under pressure from the neighborhood to the home of one of the older respected leaders in the neighborhood, and they had to sit down and publicly say, we're not going to do this anymore, we're not going to keep fighting anymore, we're going to stop, because it became so difficult. And they drank the black cup of coffee in the house of the sheikh, or the respected peacekeeper in the neighborhood. And that cup of coffee was supposed to be a signet that we stop. Now, unfortunately, it's only a black cup of coffee, and people have got a sinful nature, so there would often be blow-ups, but then they would be reminded, you drank the cup of coffee, so stop. And so that does have some sense of a staying power. And again, we're going to prayer. We're going to go and have a time of prayer, and then we will open it up for questions. I appreciate your patience and your willingness to be hanging in there when there's so much information. It's almost too much information, but you look interested, and I appreciate that very much. Let's go to prayer, and I'll lead us in prayer for at the session, the end of this second session. Father, again, we are thankful to you for the work that you're doing in Tunisia. We praise you, Father, for the indigenous church of 200 plus believers. We do pray for the completion of the Bible in Tunisian Arabic. In Libya, Father, we do thank you that there is access by people there, that Christian TV is available. Sat7 is broadcasting in that area, and radio is also available in this very closed country. We do pray for the establishment of an officially recognized indigenous Libyan church within the country. We also thank you for Egypt. We thank you for how you've helped them be a strong and large national church that has grown in depth of spirituality in the face of discrimination, at times severe persecution. We pray for the effective training of Christian leaders for many churches without a pastor. And lastly, Father, we think about Sudan, and we praise you, Father, for the freedom for Christian ministries in the north, including the Holy Bible Book Exhibition. We do pray that the millions of believers from the south spread all over the country as a result of the civil war, that they will be able to win many and disciple many. And we just want to pray this in Jesus' name, amen. We have a few minutes of questions now at the end of session 2. Does anybody here have a question? Yes?
I saw on the news this week President Bush walking along with an Arab leader and they were holding hands, but I didn't hear the news person's commentary about it. He was trying to explain something about that this is correct in that country.
Okay, the question is, how is it possible, or how do we understand where you might see two grown men, and in this case, President Bush, and who was actually probably meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. How was it that they would be holding hands? Places all across the East, including India, the Middle East, holding hands among men is not thought of as a homosexual act, but actually is a bond of friendship. It's a bond of intimacy. You see women holding hands, men holding hands. It's a sign of true appreciation. I've held the hands of an Arab man it's just an extension of an already established relationship. It's just showing the depth of that relationship, and it's thought of as very proper. Other questions? Yes?
Yes. By what we've seen, it seems like the families, the communities, the whole Arab nation act as one. It almost seems impossible how out of that group we can get terrorists. It doesn't
Okay.
It's impossible.
Okay, the comment is made that it seems that everybody works as one and lives as one, and the community is united. And your point was that you feel that it would be very hard to...
how can a terrorist exist?
How can a terrorist exist? The point is that because the community is so united, and we question is, how can a terrorist exist? Well, the fact is that the Middle East is indeed united as a whole and divided by smaller units. And those units are networks. Now, those networks can be based on family. They can be based on common philosophy or ideology. For example, Muslim fundamentalism that's outside of Islam, that is, many of these terrorist groups have a theological twist to them that have actually justified terrorism at any cost. Okay? That means that they are fundamentally non-Quranic. They are theologically non-Quranic because they've taken on a twist to their theology that's put them outside of Orthodox Islam. Now it sounds almost unbelievable. And they are a unit, a group. And so because they have begun to think in a certain direction, they're united in their ideology, and they're a cell. And so you have these cells of people, like there were the assassins throughout the Middle Ages. There were cells, and they were very small, and they were very committed to overthrowing what they believed were westernized, or they believed the assassins believed that they were corrupt Muslim governments, and the leaders needed to be gotten rid of so that a true Islamic State could grow in that area. And today, those who are like Al-Qaeda and others are committed to overthrowing the Arab governments as being westernized puppets, and also the West. And so they work in very small groups, and they continue to, attack. But the majority of Arabs are peace-loving. The majority of them are, although they resent many of the things in the West, they resent America's support of Israel, they're not on a extreme bent of twisted Islamic theology justifying their actions. So.
Yeah, it seems though that the best people to fight that would be the Arabs themselves.
Yes, that is true. The Arabs are indeed a much better force to take care of their own, and yet it takes time. So if the West says this has to happen now, and they march in, they, in many ways, they do something for the Arabs really do need to do for themselves. Other questions? Yes?
Is it, in your opinion, from whatever you
Mm-hmm.
know in relation to being over there for so long, and do you believe the Iraq people really want our help?
The question is, in terms of my understanding of the Middle East situation, do I believe the Iraqi people want our help? Can I be so honest to say yes and no? Sure. Okay. On one hand, they did want to get rid of Saddam Hussein. He was a tyrant. But in the words of an Iraqi professor at the university, I believe it's Delaware State University in Dover, if I'm not mistaken in terms of the name of the university, he said it this way. He said, "You've gotten rid of Saddam Hussein. Thank you very much. Now please leave." And now this was 2 years ago. The point being is that after the Sykes-Picot agreement, where Britain and France, on one side of their mouth, they were telling the Arabs, we are going to emancipate you, you're going to get control of your countries, you're going to get control of your destinies as of 1916. We're at the same time planning a hideous takeover of the Middle East. When I say hideous, I mean in the eyes of the Arabs. And they did exactly that. They took over the whole place. The Italians came in and they took over places. The French came in, the British came in, the Russians came in, and everybody basically took over the Middle East after they had promised that they would be given freedom because they had helped the Allies to overthrow the Ottomans, and the Turks fled for their lives because of the fifth column actions of the Arabs. There's a tremendous resentment to Western occupation of Arab lands. The reason I kept making the emphasis on 1922 to 1970, if we were historical, we realize we're only talking about 35 years when the last vestiges of European imperialism left the Arab lands. In the eyes of the Arabs, Israel is still it's basically the last part of the Western imperialism in the Middle East. The news reports that the Arabs are very happy that we're there. At the same time, I know that there's an undercurrent of deep resentment that the West is occupying an Arab land. Even if we're being a benevolent occupier, we're still an occupier. If we study British history in Iraq, we have exactly the same thing that happened, and the Arabs were very happy when the British left, okay? And the fact is that the monarchy that was established was overthrown by the Arabs about 10 years after the British left, okay? And then they established an Arab socialism. The Ba'ath Party was there. It wasn't socialism like Western socialism, it was Arab socialism. There's a tremendous feeling of a resentment of the West that they take over things. They want the control of their own destiny, and at the same time, because they live in a groupthink mentality, it's very hard for them to take the initiative to do something about their circumstances until they have a strong leader. And when they have a strong leader who rises to the top and says, this is where we're going, everybody will follow. And so Saddam Hussein offered the people a security, even though he was very harsh. But if you take a moment and you realize that, like the book says in Beirut to Jerusalem, it's a famous book that is a secular textbook, but it does talk about the Arabs and the Jews and how they think, that the Hama factor, that is, the reason that that President Assad, through his brother Rafiq, crushed very severely the rebellion in the city of Hama about 20 years ago with a vengeance that was just unbelievable, killing 40,000 people, bulldozing their houses down, was that if you don't crush resistance in a country, it'll crush you. And you have to show absolutely no mercy. So in that way, Saddam Hussein showed no mercy because he knew that if he showed any sign of weakness, then people would seek to overthrow him. And so that's called the Hama factor, which is important to understand. Why can Arabs be so cruel to Arabs? It's just because they can be extremely insecure and Gaddafi has absolutely, totally taken over the country in 40 years. He came to power and he has so many people spying on each other, and but he stays in power because he has absolute total tyranny there. Now, the idea of democracy working in the Middle East, it's a nice idea, but flows totally against, in many ways, what's already existing there. It does exist to a certain degree in Lebanon, and it does exist pretty in terms of the Palestinian territories, but there are very, very highly educated people. The Palestinians are extremely highly educated. We don't have that in every part of the Arab world. So I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions? It's late. I don't want to keep anybody, but do you have any other questions? Yes.
As Americans, how should we act when we go over to the Arab country?
We should act, quite honestly, the question was, how should we act when we go to the Middle East or we go to an Arab country? Firstly, we need to walk with extreme humility. We as Americans don't have all the answers. In fact, we can be dogmatically sure that we know what we're talking about and then find out later that we were dogmatically wrong. We have to realize that there are a number of different ways of looking at the same situation. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And that puts more balance as we look at the people in Iraq who are fighting American occupation, that in the eyes of many Iraqis, these aren't just terrorists. They could be freedom fighters in certain ways because they're trying to throw out the occupier and they're trying to throw out those people who agree with the occupier. Now, I'm not trying to make any political statements. I'm just trying to help you understand that there are more than one side to look at things. We need to go with humility, brokenness, an awareness that we need to be learners. If we go over to the Middle East and we go to say, okay, teach me all about yourselves, and we come in and we say, I don't know that, can you please tell me? Instead of coming in with the normal American attitude like we know everything, we'll find ourselves beloved, and cared for very quickly, because we're going over as students, we're going over there as teachable people, we're going over there to learn everything we can. Now, with an attitude of a learner, we end up communicating a lot more in terms of truth than we ever will do if we go in there as the teacher. Okay? Yes? Yes?
Do you think that if indeed the United States did get out of Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
that they could continue as a democracy?
The question is, do I think that the democracy in Iraq could continue if America gets out? Yes and no. The thing is that the Iraqi democracy will only continue as long as the people who are running the democracy have control of the country. Now, they can't have control of the country if they don't have the heart that, and a good case in point is the North Vietnamese were an impoverished people who attacked the South. The South had the best arms. They had brand new uniforms. They'd been trained by the Americans. They knew exactly what they were supposed to do. Why did the North Vietnamese run over the South Vietnamese like they were standing still? Because the North Vietnamese were absolutely committed to their ideology. They had a factor, and the only way I can describe that is the heart factor. They had the heart to go for it. The South Vietnamese weren't fighting for themselves. They were basically perpetuating what was already established in that this is what they were supposed to do. They weren't actually fighting with a heart. There were some, and I did not go through the Vietnamese War, but there's a factor here which in every situation is the same. Whoever has the strongest ideology and are willing to die for what they believe, okay, then they're the ones that are going to win. Now, the fact of democracy continuing, one of the things which worries me, and I hope I'm wrong, is the fact that the democracy in Iraq is hiding behind, it's in the green zone. In other words, it's hiding behind the skirts of the Americans. They're hiding in this protected zone. That's where the government of Iraq is. They're not outside in the open areas of Iraq. And if the Americans leave with all their military might, it may not last very long, and the country could take several different directions. But as long as that government is hiding behind the Americans, it's both tainted with American imperialism, and I'm trying to be very careful because I don't want to be like that I'm anti-American, but it is true that it's hiding behind American occupation authority, and it doesn't have the legitimacy to stand on its own if it can't get outside the green zone. I want to be simple on that. Yes. The next question.
Doesn't it make sense then that the longer we stay, perhaps the more, I shouldn't say dedicated, but the stronger the Iraqi leaders can become? Or is that?
The question is, will the Iraqi leadership become stronger the longer that we remain? Well, that's to be seen. According to present policy, that is the that is the policy that they're following. They believe that the longer they stay there, that they're building up the Iraqi police forces, and they're building up the Iraqi army, they're building up the government, and they're making it strong and established. Okay, that's the plan. It may take 1 year, it may take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It may take longer. The British were there for a number of years. And the monarchy that they established, putting Faisal, who was given, it was basically a perk that he was given because his father helped throw the Iraqis, helped throw the Ottomans out of Saudi Arabia, and then he himself was cast out by the Saud family. It lasted for a period of time after the British left. I have sort of a wait-and-see attitude. I hope democracy can work in Iraq, but there are certain factors right now that make me nervous, and a lot has to do with the backbone and the heart of the Iraqi police force and army and everything else that's being trained by the Americans. The fact is that they got rid of all the old echelon of officers and everything else who had been connected to the Ba'ath Party. And therefore, they took the people who had risen to the top and had really basically the clout to be able to call men to follow after them, and they tried to create a whole new army. Nation building is often very risky, especially when you're not building a nation that's your own nation. So that's, I think, enough said.